Welcome to Identiverse 2025. We're here recording live from the CyberRisk TV studio on the expo floor at the Mandalay Bay Convention Center in Las Vegas. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me for this interview is John Pritchard, CEO at Radiant Logic. Welcome to the show.
Really glad to be back at Identiverse. Great event this year. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my first Identiverse, and I've been in cybersecurity since 2001, but very quickly becoming humbled, realizing how many acronyms I don't know.
Right.
You know, just how much stuff is going on in the identity world that I am just I need to catch up on. You know, so I'm drinking from the fire hose right now.
I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel you. Even as practitioners, we go through the same thing.
Yeah, so I found it interesting that identity security is a new term, right? I'm like, when was identity not like a key part of security? When I built my first SIM in 2004, we absolutely had Active Directory data in there. We had identity data, but I'm not sure that we used it effectively back then. Like there was no correlation. Like it was still an analyst manually trying to figure out, okay, who's logged onto this laptop, right?
Yeah, I mean, identity sort of became as a productivity play, right? It was trying to help your employees get access to the apps that they needed. And it isn't until that became like a threat vector that we really sort of moved it into the security space. And it definitely is there right now.
Yeah, and again, like I see headlines like, identity is now how most attacks are happening. I'm like, when I was a pen tester in 2008, you better believe we were pre-texting, calling people up, asking for their passwords. We were sending phishing emails. You know,
the early social engineering.
Yeah, I don't feel like that's new. I feel like as an industry, maybe we're just starting to catch up a bit more to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been enough high-profile incidents, and it's affecting, I think, your real life, right? So I joke that I have a membership to every credit monitoring service in the world because something that I'm involved in has had a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. It's just the trends. It was theft of payment data was the big thing for many, many years. And then they theft all the payment data, identity data has been theft. It all got stolen, and a stolen credit card became literally worthless on the black market because it was so flooded with it. And they turned to, getting paid in a more direct manner.
Right. Literally.
Yeah, BEC and ransomware and things like that. And still, the best way in to do that is typically through a person, through stealing their credentials. We see a lot of info stealers are real big. Info stealers on Macs, no less. And Macs are pretty secure, so there's almost always a social engineering aspect to it. So all of a sudden, like, I remember UEBA being real big when I was an industry analyst at 451 back in 2013, 2014. Now we absolutely have to, I feel like we have to be doing that kind of thing, like looking for strange behavior of accounts and stuff like that today, right?
I mean, with the actors not always being human, 100%, and they're getting very advanced, as you can probably appreciate, as we've seen this played out, unfortunately. I think that's why there's a big move to security and identity and making sure that isn't forgotten in this whole space.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, AI, as if, we didn't have this solved. We really didn't need brand new technology.
We didn't need really good weapons on the other side, right?
I'm simultaneously excited about what you could do with agentic AI, with tying some of this stuff together, and just absolutely terrified because already what I'm seeing out there, they're not even using HTTPS. There's tokens floating around all over the place. These APIs, these agents have to have some way to communicate to each other, and they're doing that through OAuth and like typical non-human identity protocols and things like that, and just observability of that stuff. Like, seems like it's going to be a nightmare. Just debugging. Okay, somewhere an LLM lost its mind.
Yeah.
One of these agents just started speaking Spanish. How do we trace back where that happened? How do we figure out how to, prevent it from happening again?
I will offer, though, that we're starting to look at those from a defensive posture as well. These standards that have come out, like Model Context Protocol and Agent to Agent, are allowing us to do some specially trained agentic AI agents on the identity side. Think for like threat detection. our posture management. And the fact that they can sort of collaborate among themselves and solve a complex task, that's a huge leap forward, I think, in terms of capability. We talked about this a lot at the conference this week, just how it's rethinking the tools we use as a team. Maybe the AI agent you use isn't just for your one operator, but it's actually more like a teammate.
Yeah.
And they can collaborate among themselves, they can collaborate with the humans. It really does become this sort of like multiplayer concept, like it's an NBA draft.
So do you have any examples of that? Like what would that look like with an identity workflow, for example?
Yeah, so imagine like you've got a specialized agent in visibility or observability, and its job is to map out your environment. You can almost think of that like the terrain of your game in a base if you're playing an online game. And that's accounts, permissions, entitlements, all the things you have sort of spread out everywhere.
It has all that context.
Yeah, right. And more importantly, like it watches for those things should they change or as new things get brought on. That can then hand that off to another agent that maybe specializes in posture management.
Yeah.
And it's enacting things like least privilege, looking for orphaned accounts, over permissive accounts, and remediating those things. And then your ITDR agent then can really focus because they're not getting maybe a lot of false positives as things that are going on. And so there's a sort of symbiotic relationship about how each of these investments help the other type of agent work. But the real power is I think they can collaborate.
Yeah.
So imagine like a threat detection agent does some type of vulnerability reduction and sort of puts it to bed, but then asks compliant agents to say, can you create a control that maybe is going to limit this type of vulnerability from popping up in the first place next time?
Yeah, some kind of mitigation, a WAF rule or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Those are things we'd have to do as a human.
Yeah.
Normally between different teams. Like your threat defense team would have to like log a request, and then your control or compliance team would have to sort of get that all prioritized. I mean, I think it's really game changing about how these things might self-collaborate and do some real-time problem solving.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I think one of the concerns there is, okay, in the future, I won't have to fish a human. I can just fish the AI agent, right? Do your AI agents have to go through security awareness training?
Right.
Do they have to go through phishing testing?
So for sure, we got this big advance, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the auth-in and auth-z side of the equation for the agents. Should they be able to do what they're doing?
Yeah.
Are they behaving the way I thought it would? So it's not a panacea by far, but I mean, if anything, it helps us operate faster, but that means the risks are a little bit operating faster too.
Yeah, and I think I do like the agentic approach, this kind of idea of specialized agents better than, like, before that was proposed, we were just talking about like a single God agent, like this, special employee that knows everything about the business. I'm like, wow, that's all of a sudden the new best target for an attacker. Right? I want to talk to that. Like, that's going to be able to give me access to all the data I want, because all these agents are trained to be helpful, not suspicious, not skeptical, but helpful, and that's not what you want when an attacker is going to target it.
For sure. And we're seeing a movement away from these bigger and bigger sort of large language models, which is all we've been experiencing, I think, to date. I'm really excited about this sort of small language model concept where you've got a specialization, it knows a certain domain. You pair that with some specialized agents who know how to act on that domain, and they're able to collaborate. I mean, we're seeing like a new think around how architectures may look like.
They're cheaper to train, they're cheaper to operate. All of a sudden now you can have more private stuff. You don't have to use a service that's running in a data center consuming a quadrillion gallons of water a day to cool all the GPUs. It can run on a laptop, it can run in a browser tab, it can run on a phone. So yeah, I like it. Also, these general agents, that's one of the big challenges of having like a virtual support agent based on ChatGPT is you need it to be able to answer these 300 questions that are in your knowledge base. But it can also tell you who the 37th president of the United States. You don't need it to do that.
You don't need that. So why pay for that?
And it's expensive to put the guardrails on there.
Yes.
Now you've got to do all this AI red teaming and prompt injection protection. And it's kind of funny that the future's dumber AI, right? Dumber agents. Like after all this hype, like AGI, no, actually.
I don't need that.
actually, we don't need that. We want to move in the other direction.
What's super exciting is a lot of innovations happening in the open source community. So you're watching these models develop. that you can specialize a little bit yourself as an organization.
Llama, Mistral,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And I'm really excited about that because, I'm watching like communities like Hugging Face where you've got model developers and data owners try to collaborate in the open.
But
on
speeding
business
development
problems.
so much.
1,000%.
Anytime it's something you can do out there in the open, like that's one of the reasons I feel like if we ever see anything come out of quantum, like quantum's taken forever because you can't just go to GitHub and get some quantum.
And get some.
Right? You got to operate a quantum computer like very close to absolute zero, right? It's not something somebody's going to do in their garage.
Yeah, I mean, it's a horizon breakthrough innovation. We absolutely got to stay close to it, especially from our crypto side of what we do. But I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. So let's see. So just talking about, I think dwell time response speed. That's an interesting thing we should touch on because the only major change I've seen happen in dwell time is the speed in which the attacker sends you the ransom note, right? Like dwell time used to be a measure of the quality of an organization's security operations. And then at some point when ransomware came about, it became the speed at which the attacker hands you the ransom note, right? So how can we improve on that? Some of the stuff that we're already talking about. Like is it more traditional automation? Is there some AI involved there as well?
I often like to say I don't ever see like the future SOC being 100% automated, but I think we're moving to a lot more orchestration. And that's sort of between teams as much as anything else. Like I just was reading recently about the CISA Silent Shield work, and they did some really interesting sort of red team assessments where they dwelled for a very long time because the teams weren't really sharing the fact that they'd seen something a little anomalous with one of their sister teams.
Oh, yeah.
And so once they had sort of escalated their privileges, that the SOC maybe wasn't aware that the IT team is looking at something. And by the time they revealed themselves, they've been there a very long time. So sometimes it's not even tech. It's a little bit of like how we are working together.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I just think we're
collaboration, information sharing.
We're just so busy in our individual teams. There's just not a lot of time to do that. And I think that's a big opportunity on the AI side. So agents being able to collaborate amongst themselves, bringing in the human decision makers when needed, freeing up a little bit of our time to do a little bit more of that deep strategy work.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of security work. I think some of the biggest challenges are around having context, and that each team has its own context that other teams don't necessarily know. It's one of the reasons that vulnerability management is so difficult. Like you can't just throw vulnerabilities over the wall. Maybe this one library that needs to be updated is going to require 5,000 new lines of code to be written. It's not just you can't just swap out the library because they totally refactored the library.
Yep.
This function is deprecated, and so now you have to write for this new function, and a lot of that context is, doesn't exist within the vulnerability management team. So that, like, what's taking so long? Why is this such an issue for you guys?
We work a lot with large enterprise customers, and a lot of times their vulnerability is literally in their data. They've got all this sprawl in their organization, these legacy things they may have built over time that do serve a business function, but they were built at a time where maybe they weren't deeply instrumented into our security stack. And those things are super complicated to integrate, and they're usually owned by different teams. And you run into this situation where you've got this, what we call a blind spot. You've got this asset out there that's got some piece of identity that's maybe outside of your governance tooling or your monitoring tooling, and those become your risky things.
Yeah, like that Disney case where they fired the guy. You got the angry admin problem, I like to call it, and they had these FTP servers, and that's how they printed their menus, and that's how they edited their menus. And everybody knows the username and password for the FTP servers. It's this shared identity.
Secret.
Not linked anywhere. The governance process didn't change the FTP creds after he was fired, so he was able to get in there and mess with the menus, and he's now been arrested, sentenced. I think it's 3 years in jail, something like that. But so unfortunate, and all they had to do was change some creds.
Non-human identity, big topic this week. That's a perfect classic example of a system or a service account that's used by a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And even though you got a governance process looking at it, not everybody knows who's all using it.
Yeah.
So if I were to shut it down, I don't know what I break.
Right. Well, and yeah, I mean, so old school FTP doesn't really plug into SSO, right? You know, so like I like to think of that kind of stuff as the asbestos of IT. Like I think
Nice.
that's how we need to be thinking about some of these older protocols that really don't fit into your zero trust framework, don't really fit into the way we manage identities and governance and stuff like that now. So I think we need to get rid of it as soon as possible because there are great alternatives out there. There's no reason to leave them around except that they still work.
Yeah, and I think the threat actors are looking for these. I mean, they're not trying
Absolutely.
to defeat all layers of your security, right? They're trying to find that one misconfigured or unmanaged account like this, and they're
Yep.
like, that's where I'm going in.
Yep, spot on. Well, thank you, John, so much for joining me today. This was a lot of fun. To find out more about Radiant Logic, you can visit securityweekly.com/Radiant Logic IDV. For all Identiverse 2025 coverage by Cyber Risk Alliance, you can visit securityweekly.com/IDV. Thanks again, John.
Yeah, really
this
appreciate
was a
the
lot
time.
of fun.
Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.